The wrapping paper crinkled under my fingers as I pulled out the small rectangular boxes, each one containing what I thought would be the most fun Christmas gift I'd ever given my family. DNA ancestry kits for everyone, I announced with a grin, holding up the sleek white packages like they were winning lottery tickets. My 31-year-old brother rolled his eyes from across Mom and Dad's living room, but I could see the curiosity flickering behind his blue eyes. "Oh, Emma, this is exciting," Mom said, adjusting her reading glasses to examine the box. Her hazel eyes sparkled with genuine interest as she turned the kit over in her small hands. Dad chuckled from his favorite armchair, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "I bet we're mostly Irish and German, just like we always thought." Grandma looked up from her corner of the couch, her cardigan buttoned all the way to her chin. "Might be some surprises in there. You never know." We spent the rest of Christmas morning making wild predictions about our genetic makeup. My brother insisted we probably had Viking blood, gesturing dramatically with his coffee mug. "Look at Dad's build," he said, pointing at our father's broad shoulders. "Total Scandinavian warrior right there." I laughed, tucking my auburn hair behind my ear. With my freckles, I'm betting on heavy Irish ancestry. Maybe some Scottish thrown in for good measure. The actual sample collection was less glamorous than our grand theories. We all took turns spitting into the little tubes, making faces at each other across the kitchen table. "This is so weird," my brother muttered, sealing his vial with the provided cap. Mom giggled like a teenager. 30 years ago, who would have thought you could mail your spit somewhere and learn about your ancestors?" We packaged up our samples and sent them off together, each tube carefully labeled and sealed in its protective envelope. The company promised results in 6 to 8 weeks. "By Valentine's Day, we'll know if we're related to any famous historical figures," I joked as we walked to the mailbox together. Dad wrapped his arm around my shoulders. "Best Christmas gift idea you've had yet, sweetheart. This is going to be interesting." February arrived with its usual mix of cold rain and early spring teasers. I'd almost forgotten about the DNA tests, caught up in my work deadlines and weekend plans. Then the email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, while I was sitting at my desk, absent-mindedly eating a sandwich between meetings. "Your ancestry DNA results are ready," the subject line announced cheerfully, accompanied by a small, colorful DNA helix graphic. My heart did a little skip of excitement as I clicked the link. After all these weeks of waiting, I was finally going to see our family's genetic story laid out in percentages and colorful maps. The website loaded slowly, building anticipation with each passing second. I imagined calling my parents later, comparing our results over dinner. Everything felt normal, even fun, right up until the page fully loaded, and I saw the section labeled DNA matches. The blood drained from my face as I stared at the screen. My name sat at the top, but the family connections below it made no sense whatsoever. My brother's name appeared with the label close family, possible half-sibling. Below that, Dad's name showed up as distant relative, possible great-grandfather. But it was the complete absence of any close genetic connection to Dad that made my hands start shaking uncontrollably. I refreshed the page 3 times, certain there had to be some mistake. The percentages remained stubbornly the same, each refresh confirming what I didn't want to believe. According to these results, Thomas wasn't my father, not even close. The genetic markers showed we shared roughly the same amount of DNA as distant cousins might. My brother, meanwhile, showed up as a perfect half-sibling match with Dad, exactly what you'd expect from a father and son. I sat there in my office chair for what felt like hours, staring at the computer screen as my entire understanding of my identity crumbled around me. The freckles I'd inherited from Dad's Irish side. The way everyone always said I had my father's stubborn streak. 34 years of family jokes and shared traits. Had it all been a lie? Had Mom been lying to all of us this entire time? Somehow I made it through the rest of the workday, though I couldn't tell you what I accomplished or who I spoke with. My mind was spinning with questions I'd never thought to ask. The drive to my parents' house felt both endless and far too short. I needed answers, but I was terrified of what those answers might do to our family. My phone sat silent in my purse, the screenshot of the DNA results burning like a secret I wasn't ready to share. Mum answered the door with flour on her apron and a worn smile that made my stomach twist with guilt. She'd been baking, probably making Dad's favorite oatmeal cookies. "Emma, what a nice surprise. I wasn't expecting you tonight." She stepped aside to let me in, her hazel eyes bright with genuine happiness. I followed her into the kitchen, where the familiar smells of home now felt foreign and strange. "Mum, we need to talk," I said quietly, setting my purse on the counter with trembling hands. The change in my tone must have been obvious because her smile faded immediately. She wiped her hands on her apron, suddenly looking smaller and more fragile. "What's wrong, honey? You look upset." Her voice carried that maternal concern that had comforted me through scraped knees and broken hearts. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshot, my finger shaking as I pointed to the devastating results. The DNA tests came back, I whispered, watching her face go pale as she absorbed the information on the screen. Her hand flew to her throat, and for a moment she looked like she might faint right there in her own kitchen. "What's all the whispering about?" Dad's voice boomed from the doorway as he walked in, still wearing his flannel work shirt from whatever project he'd been tackling in the garage. His blue eyes moved from Mum's stricken face to my phone screen, and I watched 27 years of marriage begin to fracture in real time. "Linda," he said quietly, and there was something dangerous in his voice I'd never heard before. "You want to explain this?" Dad's voice rose as he gestured at my phone, his weathered hands shaking with anger. Mom backed against the counter, her small frame seeming to shrink even further. "Thomas, please, let me explain." "Explain what? That you've been lying to me for 34 years? That Emma isn't my daughter?" "Who is he, Linda?" Dad demanded, his voice breaking on my mother's name. "Who did you sleep with?" Tears streamed down Mum's face as she shook her head frantically. "Nobody, Thomas. I swear to you. There was nobody else." I stood frozen between my parents, watching 34 years of family history crumble over a Christmas gift I'd thought would be fun. The sound of Grandma's walker tapping against the linoleum announced her arrival before we saw her. She appeared in the doorway, her sharp eyes taking in the scene. "I knew this day would come," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of decades-old secrets. All three of us turned to stare at her, and I saw something that looked almost like relief cross her weathered features. "You remember things, don't you, Mother?" Dad asked his elderly mother, his voice strained with barely controlled emotion. Grandma nodded slowly, settling herself onto one of the kitchen chairs. Linda disappearing for 3 days after Emma was born, the neighbor calling her unfaithful. Each word hit like a physical blow, and I watched my mother's face crumble further with every accusation. "Remember that fight when Emma was about 5? Grandma continued, her eyes distant with memory. "You shouted that Linda had lied to you. Back then, too." Dad's face went white as the memory returned. "Jesus, Linda. Even then, I suspected something was wrong." Mom sobbed harder, her hands covering her face. "There was no one else. I don't understand how this is possible." "And Emma's baby pictures," Grandma added relentlessly. "She never looked like the rest of us. Not really. I thought about those early photos, the way I always seemed slightly out of place among my dark-haired, blue-eyed family members. My auburn hair and green eyes had always been explained away as recessive genes, throwbacks to some distant relative. A man at the supermarket once asked me if Emma was really my child," Dad said suddenly, the memory clearly painful. I thought he was just being cruel. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture I didn't want to see. Years of small inconsistencies, now viewed through this devastating new lens. I felt like I was watching my family dissolve in real time, all because of a gift I'd given with nothing but love. The sound of my brother's key in the front door interrupted our kitchen catastrophe. His cheerful voice called out as he walked in, completely unaware of the storm he was entering. "Hey, did everyone's DNA results come back yet? Mine were pretty boring, mostly what we expected." His voice trailed off as he took in our tear-stained faces. "What happened?" he asked quietly, his athletic frame filling the doorway as he assessed the damage. I wordlessly handed him my phone, watching his blue eyes scan the results. The color drained from his face as he realized what he was seeing. "This can't be right," he whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. The evidence was right there in black and white percentages. He was Dad's son. I wasn't Dad's daughter. The math was brutal in its simplicity. "So what, Linda?" my brother asked, his voice cold in a way I'd never heard before. "You just let Dad raise another man's child for 34 years? Mum looked between her children, both of us now staring at her with suspicion and hurt. "I never cheated. I swear on my mother's grave, I never cheated." But the DNA results made her protests seem hollow, desperate lies to cover decades of deception. In the midst of our family's destruction, my phone buzzed with a new notification. Another DNA match had appeared in my results. Someone named Grace Miller, aged 56. The app labeled her as a close relative, suggesting we might be half-sisters or aunt and niece. I stared at the name, feeling like Alice tumbling further down the rabbit hole of my shattered identity. With shaking fingers, I sent Grace Miller a message through the DNA app's messaging system. "Hi, we appear to be closely related. I'm trying to understand my family history. Could we talk?" Her response came back within an hour, almost as if she'd been waiting for someone to contact her. "I've been hoping someone from your family would reach out. There are things you need to know about our connection." Grace suggested we meet at a small cafe downtown, somewhere neutral, where we could talk privately. I agreed, though part of me wondered if I was making everything worse. My family was already in ruins. How much more damage could one conversation do? As I drove to meet this stranger who shared my DNA, I caught sight of my reflection in the rearview mirror and wondered if I'd recognize myself by the time this was over. The moment Grace Miller walked into the cafe, I felt like I was looking into a funhouse mirror. She had my auburn hair, streaked with silver, and the same green eyes that stared back at me every morning. Her bone structure was strikingly similar to mine, the same sharp cheekbones and gentle jawline that I'd always assumed came from Mum's side of the family. We sat across from each other in stunned silence for several long moments, both processing the undeniable physical resemblance. "I was adopted," Grace said finally, her voice soft but steady. 56 years ago, from the same hospital where you were born, and during the exact same week." My coffee cup rattled against the saucer as I set it down with trembling hands. "The same hospital? The same week?" Grace nodded, reaching into her purse to pull out a weathered envelope. "My adoptive mother left me this note before she died. She said there were things I needed to know." Grace unfolded a piece of yellowed stationery and slid it across the table. The handwriting was shaky, but clear, like someone had written it with great care. "Something wasn't right at the hospital," I read aloud. "A baby went home with the wrong family. Documents were changed." My vision blurred as the implications hit me. "You think we were switched at birth?" "Look at us, Emma," Grace said gently. "We could be versions of the same person, and your DNA results show we're closely related, but not to the man who raised you." I studied her face, seeing myself in her features but aged by 22 years. It was like looking at a crystal ball of my own future. The idea that I'd been living someone else's life for 34 years was almost too enormous to comprehend. The drive back to my parents' house felt surreal. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, seeing Grace's face instead of my own. Had my entire existence been a mistake? Was I supposed to be living Grace's life while she lived mine? The questions multiplied with every mile, creating a tangle of possibilities that all led to the same devastating conclusion. I found my family still gathered in the kitchen, their faces etched with exhaustion and grief. Dad looked like he'd aged 10 years in the few hours I'd been gone. "There's more," I said quietly, and watched hope die a little more in each of their eyes. I told them about Grace, about the note, about the possibility that I'd been switched at birth. "Oh God," Mum whispered, her hands flying to her mouth. "Oh God, Emma, what if you're not even my baby?" The thought seemed to break something fundamental inside her. She doubled over, sobbing with a grief so raw it hurt to witness. "I carried you for 9 months," she cried. "I felt you kick. I went through labor. How could you not be mine?" "Jesus Christ, Linda," Dad said, his voice thick with shame. "I accused you of cheating when you might have been as much a victim as anyone." He tried to reach for Mum, but she pulled away, lost in her own private hell of doubt and confusion. I realized that in trying to solve one mystery, I'd created an even more devastating possibility. As if the universe had a sense of dramatic timing, my phone chimed with a new email, just as our family reached its lowest point. The sender was the DNA testing company, and the subject line made my heart stop. "Urgent notice, potential processing error. Your test may have been affected." The kitchen fell completely silent as I read the message aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. "We have identified a processing error that may have affected a small number of samples processed during your testing period," the email continued. "Please submit a new sample at no charge so we can provide you with accurate results." The room was so quiet I could hear the kitchen clock ticking on the wall. "You mean," my brother said slowly, his voice hollow, "all of this might be because of a lab mistake?" We looked around at each other, taking in the wreckage of our family, the accusations, the tears, the shattered trust. All of it potentially caused by someone's error in a laboratory hundreds of miles away. We agreed to redo the DNA tests, though the damage to our family felt irreversible. The trust that had held us together for decades had been shattered. Mum moved into the guest bedroom. Dad started staying late at work. My brother stopped calling. Even as the new results showed we were all related, how could we go back to the way things were? The second round of waiting was torture. None of us knew how to act around each other, while we waited for science to tell us who we really were. Family dinners became stilted affairs, where we made small talk about the weather and avoided looking directly at each other. I found myself studying my reflection obsessively, trying to see Dad's features in my face, and coming up empty every time. Throughout this waiting period, Grace and I continued to talk. She'd become a strange anchor in my storm of uncertainty, the one person who understood what it felt like to have your identity questioned. "Whatever the new results show," she told me during one of our coffee meetings, "you're still you. Your family's love was real, even if the genetics were wrong." Her words provided comfort, but they couldn't heal the wounds that had already been inflicted. 8 weeks after submitting our second samples, the email arrived. This time, I didn't open it alone. We all gathered in my parents' living room, the same space where I handed out those Christmas gifts months earlier. My hands shook as I logged into the website, everyone crowding around my laptop screen. The page loaded, and this time the results were completely different. According to the new, corrected results, Dad and I were definitely father and daughter. The genetic markers aligned perfectly, showing the close parental relationship we'd all believed in for 34 years. My brother remained a full sibling, not a half-sibling. We shared both parents, just as we always had. Grace Miller appeared in my matches as a distant cousin, related but not closely enough to suggest any kind of family mix-up. A follow-up email from the DNA company explained the extent of their error. Sample tubes had been mislabeled, results had been cross-contaminated, and multiple protocols had been ignored. Dozens of families had received incorrect results during the same processing period, causing untold damage to relationships across the country. The company offered their sincere apologies and a substantial settlement, but words and money couldn't undo the months of pain they'd caused. Learning that we were all biologically related should have been a moment of pure joy, but the celebration felt hollow after everything we'd been through. Too many harsh words had been spoken, too many accusations had been made, too much trust had been broken. We sat in that living room, staring at the correct results and wondering how to rebuild what we'd destroyed. "Linda," Dad said finally, his voice cracking with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I should have trusted you. I should have known you'd never lie to me." Mom looked at him with eyes still red from months of crying. The results seemed so certain, Thomas. Even I started to doubt myself. They held each other for the first time in months, but I could see how fragile they both still were. "I can't believe I turned on you, Mom," my brother said, his voice thick with guilt. "I just accepted those results without question and treated you like you'd been lying our whole lives." Mum reached out to touch his face, her maternal instincts overriding her own pain. "We all believed what we saw, honey. None of us knew it was wrong." But I could see the hurt lingering in her eyes, the wound of being doubted by her own children. Grandma, who had seemed so sure of Mom's guilt, now looked smaller and more frail than I'd ever seen her. "I let old gossip cloud my judgment," she admitted quietly. "That neighbor who called you unfaithful, she was always a troublemaker. I should have defended you." The weight of her assumption had added to Mum's burden, and we all felt the shame of how quickly we'd turned against her. To put the final pieces together, we requested my original birth records from the hospital. If there had been any kind of mix-up or documentation error, we needed to know. The hospital was surprisingly cooperative, perhaps motivated by the recent news stories about DNA testing errors affecting families nationwide. Within a week, they provided complete documentation of my birth and the days that followed. The hospital records were crystal clear. I had been born to Linda and Thomas, exactly as my parents had always said. There had been no mix-up, no switched babies, no adoption irregularities. Mum's 3-day absence after my birth had been due to complications that required extended monitoring. The neighbor's gossip had been exactly that, gossip with no basis in fact. When I shared the hospital records with Grace, she wasn't surprised. Her own adoption investigation had revealed that her birth parents were a young couple from another state entirely. Our physical resemblance had been pure coincidence, the kind of genetic lottery that sometimes creates strangers who look like siblings. "I'm glad you found your way back to your real family," she said with genuine warmth. "Even if we're not sisters, I'm grateful we met." A class action lawsuit against the DNA company revealed the full extent of their negligence. Untrained employees, ignored safety protocols, and a corporate culture that prioritized speed over accuracy. Our family joined dozens of others in seeking justice for the damage caused by their carelessness. The financial settlement was substantial, but no amount of money could truly compensate for the months of pain and fractured relationships. Healing our family took time and intentional effort. We started with small steps: family dinners, shared activities, open conversations about the hurt we'd all experienced. Mum and Dad went to counseling to repair their marriage. My brother and I made a point of calling Mum more often, trying to rebuild the trust we'd damaged. Slowly, carefully, we began to remember who we'd been before that terrible Christmas gift changed everything. The following Christmas was deliberately low-key. No surprise gifts, no dramatic revelations, just the 5 of us gathered around the same table where everything had fallen apart. We held hands as Dad said grace, something we hadn't done since we were children. Mom squeezed my fingers, and I felt the warmth of unconditional love that I'd taken for granted for so many years. Grace joined us for dessert, having become an honorary family member through our shared ordeal. We almost lost each other over a lie, I said quietly as we cleared the dinner dishes together. Mum paused in her work, looking around at her reassembled family. But we found each other again with the truth. The DNA test had been wrong, but in a strange way, it had shown us how much we really meant to each other. In the end, the crisis had revealed something important about our family. Our love for each other was stronger than genetic markers or laboratory results. We were connected by more than shared DNA. We were bound by 34 years of memories, experiences, and unconditional love. No test tube or computer algorithm could measure what really made us family.